The United States has appointed Jeff Landry as a so-called Special Envoy to Greenland, and his recent statements have escalated tensions fast.
And all we're going to do is go have us a great conversation with those folks in Greenland. They're in the Western Hemisphere, fits inside the Monroe Doctrine, and we're going to bring them some great Cajun food.
Landry openly talked about gaining control over Greenland and later referenced the Monroe Doctrine in a message to Greenlanders. This is not normal diplomacy, it's a huge provocation to Denmark and to Greenland. So what is actually going on, and could the US really succeed in this endeavor? My name is Stephen Højlund and I'm a Danish social science PhD, and I have followed Greenland and Arctic politics closely for years. Let's start with why the reactions from Copenhagen and Nuuk have been so strong. First, these statements ignore Danish sovereignty over Greenland. Greenland is part of the sovereign entity known as the Kingdom of Denmark. That status is recognized by the UN, NATO, and in bilateral agreements, including with the United States. Second, the rhetoric ignores Greenlanders themselves. Greenland has home rule, its own parliament, and a legal right to self-determination. Talking about control without consent dismisses the population entirely.
If they say that Denmark was there 300 years ago or something with a boat, well, we were there with boats too, I'm sure.
Trump's idea that Denmark was only present with boats 300 years ago is completely misleading. Norse settlers arrived in Greenland more than 1,000 years ago, centuries before the US even existed. In fact, they also arrived in North America, making the US Danish, if we should apply the same logic. Fourth, appointing an envoy with an explicit objective to gain control is a direct provocation. This goes far beyond normal diplomatic language. But why is the US taking this approach? In international politics, contesting territory often starts by contesting legitimacy. If you weaken another country's claim, you open room for pressure later on. Referencing the Monroe Doctrine is part of that strategy.
They're in the Western Hemisphere, fits inside the Monroe Doctrine.
The doctrine framed the Western Hemisphere as an American sphere of influence. Historically, it was presented as anti-European colonialism, but in practice it became a tool for American dominance and neocolonialism. The USA has repeatedly accepted Danish sovereignty over Greenland, latest in 1916 and 1945. And several European countries still have territories in the Western Hemisphere today. So the doctrine is being selectively revived. Overall, the goal appears to be undermining Danish authority rather than following international law. And now to the key question of this video, why I don't think it will succeed for the US administration to take over Greenland. First, time is against the US administration. Presidential terms are pretty short and Trump has about 3 years left. And foreign policy priorities change really quickly. A future administration could abandon this unlawful and ludicrous approach altogether. Second, there is no realistic mechanism for instant political realignment in Greenland. No envoy can simply arrive and flip public opinion overnight. In the usual American fashion, some glorified boomer lawyer that supported the US president is sent out in the world to fix things. This is Trump's favorite way of doing things, and it's not really working in Ukraine or any other place. Being the governor of Louisiana doesn't help you much in dealing with another country that you have no grasp of whatsoever. And here's my personal take on why it will not really work out for the Americans. Americans and American decision makers in particular often overestimate how attractive US society is to Western Europeans. Third, this strategy antagonizes NATO allies. Denmark is a founding NATO member. Undermining Danish sovereignty weakens trust across the alliance, and NATO is far more valuable to the US than Greenland alone. If the US wants security, they need NATO more than they need Greenland, in other words. Fourth, the US has done nothing for decades to strengthen the bases they already have in Greenland, so the US president's argument about security is weak altogether. And finally, I don't think that Congress will approve of this hostile and aggressive approach. So what can the US actually do about it? If we strip this down to pure strategy, the options are very limited. One option would be direct military intervention. Another would be indirect influence operations aimed at shaping politics from within. Both operations carry extreme risk, and again, I don't think that they would be approved by the American people and the American Congress. Military action would likely collapse the NATO alliance. That outcome would severely damage US global power. Large-scale covert influence would take years and face strong resistance in the Greenlandic population. And success of this would be uncertain at best. A more realistic scenario would involve trying to influence local political actors. That means identifying sympathetic voices and supporting them politically and financially. Even that would require long-term effort and transparency risks as well. How can Greenland and Denmark respond? This is where the real stakes lie. The future at risk is Greenland's, not really Denmark's. Denmark would remain Denmark without Greenland, but Greenland, on the other hand, would change fundamentally as a US territory. Living conditions for the average Greenlander would likely deteriorate over time and probably fairly rapidly. That means that Greenlanders need to take this very seriously, and they need to take it seriously now. Greenlanders are a peaceful nation, but they might need to rise up to the task and take their future a little bit more seriously than they do now, because Denmark cannot do it for them alone. The Greenlandic society needs to come together. That's probably the first thing that needs to happen. They need to seal the cracks that will be exploited by the Americans. For example, who are the individuals most likely to be swayed by the American money that are soon to come? At the same time, Greenlanders need to aggressively tell the Americans that they are not welcome.
Mr. Trump, fuck off.
The world needs to see photos of really angry Greenlanders, real emotions, not just polite talk about how worried they are and how Greenland should be independent. I don't think it's enough to stop what is coming now. Also, Greenland needs to prepare itself for hybrid warfare and large-scale propaganda as they have never seen it before. Americans are world champions in marketing and changing perceptions. I don't know, it might require shutting down Facebook or other parts of the internet to withstand the communication tsunami that might be coming now, favoring the US and a US annexation. Denmark and Greenland together can do a lot to make the life of Americans on the ground in Greenland really difficult as well. There are many tricks in the book, and I'm sure that the Danish Secret Services know all of them. One can just imagine how cold it can be in your consulate building if the heat keeps shutting off for no apparent reason, or how annoying it is to always be taken out for customs control or denied entry or visa altogether. Unfortunately, Denmark always plays nice. I really hope that Danish state officials know how to play and fight without the gloves on this time. These are dangerous and defining times for Greenland, more defining than for Denmark. Independence dreams alone are no longer enough, unfortunately. Understanding power, pressure and long-term consequences is now essential for Greenland. And Greenlanders across Greenland really need to come together now, stand together, and then chart the future that they want for themselves in the face of this danger that they're facing. If you want more news and context, watch my videos on Denmark.